The night air in the village of Kaburi was thick, wet with the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves. A full moon barely peeked through the twisted canopy of the forest, painting long, jagged shadows that danced along the dirt paths. Locals rarely spoke of the forest after sunset, for they believed that the spirits of the ancestors roamed freely, and that some places were not meant for mortal eyes. But Nalia, a food blogger from Accra, had always been drawn to the strange, the forbidden, the stories whispered in hushed tones at village fires. Her guide, Oba, an old man with skin like polished mahogany and eyes sharp as a hawk's, led her through the winding paths. "Child, you should not be here," he warned. "They say the restaurant does not open for living men, only for shadows, only for those who have no name among the living." Nalia's camera swung in her hands, the lens catching glimmers of her own reflection on the wet leaves. "Shadows?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper, though curiosity burned in her chest. Oba shook his head. "Yes, shadows. Those who have died yet linger. The hungry souls who cannot rest. The restaurant, it opens for them. But for you it is dangerous." He stopped abruptly. A faint glow shimmered in the distance, flickering like a lantern caught in the wind. Nalia squinted, her heart quickening. There, in a clearing, stood a small building she could not have imagined even in her dreams. Its walls were blackened wood, strangely smooth, almost as if carved from shadow itself. A faint smoke curled from a chimney that seemed impossibly thin, curling like a snake through the moonlight. The air changed the moment they approached. It became thicker, colder, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Nalia noticed the faint sound first, low whispers, unintelligible, drifting from the restaurant's doorway. Then the smell, iron and spices, sweet and burning, mingled in a way that made her stomach twist. Oba stopped again. "Once you step inside, you may not see the world the same way again. Do you still wish to enter?" Nalia hesitated only for a heartbeat. The thrill of discovery, the pull of the unknown, outweighed fear. "Yes," she said. The door creaked open before her fingers touched it. Inside, darkness stretched endlessly, yet it was not entirely void. Shadows moved like living things along the walls, condensing into shapes that seemed almost human. The scent of food was stronger here, richer, but impossible to identify. A dish of death and spice. A voice called from the far end of the hall. Low, velvety, resonant. "Welcome, Nalia." She froze. She had never spoken her name aloud in that place. And yet the shadowed figure in the corner, a man whose face was hidden beneath a hood, whose hands seemed translucent, spoke it like a greeting at a homecoming. Oba whispered urgently, "Do not eat, do not drink, touch only, learn." The room filled slowly with shapes, shadowed forms that slithered across the floor like liquid smoke. Some were human, or at least had the outline of human limbs. Others were twisted, animalistic, as if the nightmares of the forest had grown limbs and walked out into reality. They moved to tables, chairs, a service counter that appeared and disappeared in the flicker of candlelight that had no source. One shadow approached Nalia. It extended a hand, not with fingers, but with tendrils of darkness that writhed as if alive. "Sit," it said. Its voice was many voices at once, whispers layered atop whispers, a choir of the lost. Nalia's camera trembled in her hands. She wanted to run, but her feet moved of their own accord, guided by some unseen thread. She sat, and the shadow beside her dissolved into smoke that circled the room, carrying scent she could almost recognize. Roasted yam, blood, and something else, metallic, bitter, ancient. The room changed again. Now she could see the ceiling high above, carved with faces screaming silently. The shadows of the patrons flickered on the walls like grotesque puppets. Each time she blinked, the faces seemed closer, their mouths moving, mouthing words she could not hear. Then the floor beneath her shifted. She stumbled, gripping the table. Shadows pooled around her legs, climbing, swirling, whispering. "Eat, stay, join." Oba's voice was faint, almost lost among the murmurs. "You must leave before the bell tolls thrice, or they will claim you." A bell rang, deep and hollow, shaking the air and reverberating through her bones. Nalia looked around. No source, only the sound, echoing endlessly. The shadows froze. For a moment, silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then the shadows lunged, fast and fluid, and the restaurant seemed alive, walls breathing, floor pulsing beneath them. Nalia ran, tripping, falling. She felt cold hands, or something that was hands, wrap around her ankles, trying to pull her down. She screamed, voice swallowed by the murmuring darkness. Oba's arms were around her. "Now, run!" They burst through the doorway into the night air. The restaurant behind them was gone, replaced by empty forest. Only the moon, pale and indifferent, hung in the sky. Her camera still hung around her neck, recording, though she dared not look at what she had captured. The whispers lingered in her mind, as did the taste of iron and spice. She had escaped for now. But she knew, deep down, the restaurant had seen her. And it remembered. As they walked back to the village, the forest seemed quieter, almost respectful, but the shadows behind the trees, lingering patient, reminded her that some doors, once opened, never truly close. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly, swallowing the path behind them. Nalia's breath came in short, ragged gasps, each one tasting of the iron and spice that lingered in her mouth. Oba's hand gripped hers tightly, guiding her through twisted roots and low-hanging branches that scraped her face. She felt the pull of the restaurant, an invisible tug, as if it were tethered to her very soul. "Did it follow us?" she whispered. Oba's face was grim in the moonlight. "It can't leave the forest, not yet. But it can remember. And remembering is enough." Nalia shivered. The memory of those shadowy patrons, limbs like smoke, faces screaming silently, tendrils curling around her ankles, made her feel as though her skin had been borrowed by something else. She clutched her camera, as if it could protect her. As they walked deeper into the forest, shapes moved just beyond her vision. Dark silhouettes slipped between trees, always out of focus, always vanishing when she tried to look directly at them. The air grew colder, and she began to notice whispers again, faint at first, then building. A chorus of voices she couldn't recognize, chanting in a language older than the village itself. Suddenly, a tree fell across the path, massive and rotted from the inside. Nalia jumped back, heart pounding, and caught sight of a shadow moving across the trunk, a figure hunched, limping, but undeniably human in shape. The shadow paused and tilted its head, watching them. Its eyes glowed faintly, red embers burning in the darkness. "Run," Oba hissed. "Do not let it touch you." They sprinted, branches whipping their faces, the undergrowth tearing at their clothes. Behind them, the whispers became voices, clear, angry, accusing. "Return, return, return." Finally, they reached the river that bordered the edge of the forest. Its waters were black, mirroring the night sky, reflecting 1,000 shadowy figures Nalia could not see directly. The current moved strangely, faster than the wind, carrying the faintest smell of smoke and burning herbs. Oba crouched at the water's edge, producing a small pouch from his robes. He sprinkled its contents into the river, a mixture of crushed roots, powdered bone, and something that shimmered like ash. Immediately, the whispers faltered, twisting into confusion, shrieking as if in pain. Nalia watched, mesmerized, as the surface of the water bubbled and the reflections shifted, now showing not only the forest but fleeting glimpses of the restaurant. Its blackened walls, candlelit tables, shadows waiting patiently. "You cannot fight it," Oba said, his voice low. "You can only escape for now. The restaurant remembers the living. And it waits for those who see too much." Nalia's thoughts raced. How could a place like that exist? How could shadows eat and move like humans? She raised her camera and pressed record, capturing the river, the forest, and perhaps, unknowingly, the memory of the restaurant. Oba motioned her forward. "We go back to the village. The elders will know what to do next." As they neared the village, Nalia noticed smoke rising from huts in the distance. Not from cooking fires but thin, curling trails like fingers reaching for the sky. Something about the smoke felt wrong, unnatural, as if it carried the essence of the shadows themselves. The village greeted them in eerie silence. Normally, villagers would be outside, tending to night chores, but now, not a single soul moved. Only the distant howl of a hyena reminded Nalia that she was still in Africa, in a place ruled by forests and spirits. Oba led her to a small, circular hut at the edge of the village. The walls were covered in carvings of ancestors, their eyes hollow and watching. Inside, the air smelled of herbs, incense, and something darker, the memory of shadow. An old woman sat by a fire, her back bent, hands moving in slow, deliberate motions over a wooden bowl filled with an unknown mixture. "You've seen it," the old woman said without looking up. Her voice was cracked but sharp. "The restaurant. Only the shadows eat there, yet it calls to the living. And now it calls you." Nalia swallowed. "Why me?" The woman's eyes finally met hers, black as obsidian, reflecting the firelight. "Because you are curious. 'Cause you are bold. Because you are alive. Yet it tastes your fear like honey. Beside, we must prepare. The next time it opens, you may not run so easily." Nalia's stomach turned. "Prepare? How?" The woman's hand stopped, and she picked a small knife from beside her. She traced sigils on Nalia's arms, sharp and deliberate, a mixture of pain and ritual burning slightly into her skin. "You must bind yourself to the living world. The shadows cannot touch what is tied by blood and fear." Hours passed. The ritual continued, each movement of the woman's hands accompanied by chants in a language Nalia could barely understand. The forest outside seemed alive, rustling, pressing against the walls as if listening. Every now and then, Nalia glimpsed shadows moving just beyond the windows, obeying some rule she did not yet understand. By the time the ritual ended, the first hints of dawn touched the horizon. Oba guided her outside, where the forest looked almost ordinary, the path familiar. But Nalia knew better. Somewhere beyond those trees, in the darkness that clung to the edges of the village, the restaurant waited. And it would open again. She shivered, knowing she had survived this night, but that survival had marked her. The shadows whispered to her even now, calling her name softly, promising the next invitation. Nalia tried to sleep, but the forest had already crept into her mind. Every whisper of wind, every rustle of leaves, sounded like voices calling her name. Even in the village, the shadows lingered in corners, refusing to leave her alone. She could feel them watching from behind walls, hiding in reflections, curling in the edges of her vision. Days passed, but Nalia couldn't shake the memory of the restaurant. Every time she blinked, the blackened wood, the glowing ember eyes of the shadow patrons, and the scent of iron and spice invaded her senses. Her camera, once a tool for curiosity, now felt like a tether to that other world. One night, Oba returned to her side. "It calls again," he said, voice grim. "Tonight it will open." You must go, but only with caution. Do not let curiosity guide you alone. The shadows know every step of the forest, every root, every stone. Nalia nodded, though fear tightened her chest like a vice. She felt the pull, magnetic and terrible, of the restaurant. As midnight approached, the air thickened. The village fell silent, even the night insects seeming to hush themselves. Nalia followed Oba through the familiar forest path, her heart drumming in sync with her footsteps. The smell of damp earth mixed with spice grew stronger, and then she saw it again. The restaurant, black and impossible, rose from the forest floor like a living thing. Smoke spiraled from the chimney, curling and twisting like serpents. Shadows pooled at the doorway, waiting. Oba whispered, "Do not enter unless you are ready. Tonight it will test you." Nalia stepped forward. The door opened before she touched it. Inside it was darker than before. The candlelight flickered, revealing the twisted faces of shadow patrons, each one staring directly at her as if they had been expecting her. One shadow moved forward, not the same as before. This one had a human-like shape, but its features were blurred, as if drawn in smoke. "Welcome back, Nalia," it hissed. Its voice was velvet over steel. "You have returned willingly." Oba's warning echoed in her mind. "Do not eat. Do not drink." The shadows circled the tables, their movements like water flowing over rocks. Nalia noticed a new detail. Some of them held objects. A shadow lifted a fork, another a knife, and yet another cradled a small, flickering flame in its hands. They mimicked human dining, yet everything was wrong. "Why do you linger here?" Nalia demanded, voice trembling. The shadow smiled, a distortion of joy and hunger. "Because the living are delicious. Because the curious are sweetest." The walls of the restaurant began to breathe. Shadows pressed against the wood, forming faces, mouths opening and closing silently, whispering promises and threats simultaneously. Nalia's camera recorded it all, but she could feel the darkness tugging at her soul, pulling her toward the tables, the food, the waiting shadows. Oba placed a hand on her shoulder. "Focus on your fear. Bind it. Bind yourself to the living." Nalia closed her eyes. She felt the shadows reach, tendrils curling around her legs, arms, and neck. A faint pain burned in her chest, as if the restaurant was trying to consume not her body, but her essence. She repeated the chants Oba had taught her, the words of protection, of binding to life and blood. The shadows recoiled, hissing, twisting, screeching, yet they did not vanish. They circled, waiting, patient and endless. Suddenly, the restaurant shifted again. The tables rose into the air, twisting into shapes that mirrored the forest outside. The floor became roots, the ceiling the canopy of an impossible night sky. Shadows climbed the walls like trees, their eyes glowing as they whispered secrets Nalia could almost understand. And then, at the far end of the hall, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was humanoid but larger than any human she had seen. Its eyes burned like coals, its mouth opened in a silent scream, yet every shadow in the restaurant seemed to obey it. "You seek knowledge, but some doors are meant only for shadows," the figure said, voice rolling like thunder and wind. "Tonight one may leave, one may stay. Choose, child of flesh." Nalia froze. The weight of choice pressed on her like stones. If she stayed, the shadows would consume her, twist her, make her part of their endless banquet. If she ran, the restaurant would remember, waiting, calling her back again and again, until she could no longer resist. Her hand shook as she reached for the door. Every shadow in the room stretched toward her, wailing, whispering, screaming, a symphony of despair. She ran, heart in her throat, pulling Oba along. They burst into the forest again. The restaurant collapsed behind them, folding into the shadows, leaving only the smell of iron and spice. But Nalia knew it would open again. She could feel the pull in her bones, in her blood, a reminder that curiosity has a price. Oba turned to her. You survived. But the shadow remembers. We'll wait. And it always calls back the ones who see too much. Nalia's stomach churned. She looked at her camera. Every frame, every second recorded horror she barely dared to comprehend. And in the reflection on the lens, she saw movement, shadows that had no source. The forest, alive and patient, whispered around them. And somewhere, deep in the darkness, the restaurant waited. The next night Nalia could not sleep. Every shadow in her hut seemed alive, twisting in corners, flickering unnaturally when the moonlight shifted. Even the fire refused to burn normally, sputtering with black smoke that smelled faintly of iron and charred roots. She touched the carvings on the wall, the ancestral faces, seeking comfort, but their eyes seemed hollow, watching, waiting. Oba arrived silently, robes brushing against the ground. It calls again, he said. And tonight, you may not leave easily. You must confront it, or it will consume your name entirely. Nalia swallowed. She had felt the pull for days, an ache in her chest as if something from the other side was tugging at her very soul. She followed Oba, the forest unusually still. Not even the cicadas sang. Only the snapping of twigs beneath their feet echoed in the thick night. The restaurant awaited them, rising from the forest floor like a shadow-shaped storm, blackened wood bending unnaturally. It seemed larger than ever. Smoke spiraled from the chimney, curling like serpents of darkness. The whispers grew, voices chanting her name in a language older than memory. Inside, it was a cathedral of shadow. The walls breathed, the ceiling warped into impossible angles, and the floor pulsed like a living heart. The shadow patrons were everywhere, their bodies fluid, faces indistinct, murmuring promises and threats in unison. At the far end of the hall stood the figure from the last night. Larger, more terrifying, eyes burning like coals, mouth a permanent scream. Shadows twisted around it like smoke obeying fire. You return, it said, voice rolling across the room like wind over bones. Now you must choose. Flesh or shadow. Oba's hand squeezed Nalia's. Remember the chance. You are alive. You have blood and fear and binding. That is your weapon. The shadows surged forward. Nalia felt tendrils wrap around her ankles, arms, face, but she stood firm. She repeated the words Oba had taught her, louder this time, embedding her fear into courage. The tendrils recoiled, writhing, shrieking, but not vanishing. Then the floor itself opened, revealing a pit beneath. A river of shadow flowed there, moving as if alive. Faces swam in its depths, screaming silently. The larger figure beckoned. One step, and you join them. Or flee, and be hunted forever. Nalia stepped back. Heart pounding, mind racing, she looked around for a way out. The shadow patrons moved in a circle, closing in. Every wall, every ceiling, every shadow seemed aware of her choice. Oba placed his hand over her chest. Focus. Remember your life, your ancestors, your strength. Nalia closed her eyes. She pictured her village, her family, the warmth of sunlight on the earth. She visualized the ritual's sigils burning into her skin, a tether to the living. She felt the shadows trying to invade, pull, consume, and she fought. A scream erupted from the figure. Shadows writhed violently, shrieking in unison. Then suddenly silence. The restaurant shuddered, walls bending, ceiling twisting, smoke spiraling in erratic patterns. The shadows froze, their forms flickering. Nalia's pulse echoed in the room, a heartbeat that matched the rhythm of the building itself. Then the doorway appeared. Not the one they had entered, but a new one, carved of light and shadow together. A faint wind blew from it, carrying the smell of forest after rain, of earth and life. "Go," Oba said. "Go and do not look back." Nalia ran, every shadow behind her recoiling, retreating as if bound by her will. She reached the doorway, burst through, and stumbled into the forest. The restaurant was gone, replaced by trees, mist, and the quiet night. But she knew it was not destroyed, only waiting, biding time. Oba's voice echoed softly behind her. "It remembers your courage and your fear. One day, it will call again, and then you may not escape so easily." Nalia looked down at her camera. The footage recorded everything. The shadows, the smoke, the impossible architecture, the screaming faces. A record of a world the living were never meant to see. The forest sighed, and the wind carried a whisper. "We will see you again, Nalia." She shivered, knowing that the restaurant, the shadows, the hunger for the living were patient, immortal, and always watching. Subscribe if you dare, to witness more shadowed horrors and haunted places lurking beyond the living world.